5 a.m. pitch black. Tom Whitfield woke up to a sound he'd never heard before in 19 years on this farm. Not thunder, not wind, a groan, low, deep, coming up to the ground itself. He didn't know it yet, but 90 yards of forest, trees older than his grandfather, had just collapsed onto his land in the space of about 4 seconds. By sunrise, he was standing at the gate, staring at 40 tons of splintered oak and broken beech piled across his best field. His fences gone, his access track buried, a third of his farm wiped out overnight. Every single person who saw that field told him the exact same thing. Bulldoze it, skip it, walk away. Tom didn't listen. And 90 days later, that same pile of worthless storm debris was worth 90,000 pounds. Stick around, because the way he did will change how you look at every fallen tree you ever drive past again. Rewind 4 days. The rain hadn't stopped since Monday. Not a downpour, worse. The slow, relentless kind that soaks into everything and doesn't let go. By Thursday night, the ground under Tom's boundary was less like soil and more like soup. Nobody warned him. There was no crack, no falling branch to give it away. The roots just let go, all at once. One tree pulled the next down as it fell, then the next, a chain reaction that took less time than it takes to read the sentence. By the time Tom reached the gate that morning, it was already over. He stood there a long moment, rain running down his collar, staring at what used to be a forest. His neighbor Bill showed up that afternoon. Didn't even get out of the truck. That's a digger job, Tom. Skip Lorry in a match, if you ask me. Tom just nodded. Then he did something nobody in the village expected. He didn't call anyone. Not the merchant. Not the clearance crew. For 3 days, he walked the wreckage alone, hand on every trunk, like he was checking on a downed animal. If you've never stood in front of something that big and felt completely powerless, you won't understand what happened next. But if you have, you already know exactly why he didn't reach for the phone. If this kind of story pulls you in, hit subscribe now, because what's buried under that timber is about to change everything for Tom. He pressed a thumbnail into the bark of the first beech. Soft, water-rotted, years in the making. Worthless. He marked it and moved on. Then he reached the oak. 4 of them, massive, straighter than trees that age had any right to be. He pulled his grandfather's old pocketknife from his coat, the same knife his grandfather had used to build the hay barn still standing 40 feet away, and cut a small notch into the bark. What he saw underneath stopped him cold. Tight grain, pale, almost flawless. The kind of wood that takes 100 years to grow, and about 10 seconds to walk straight past if you don't know what you're looking at. A week later, a timber buyer pulled up in a dusty Land Rover, walked the pile with his hands in his pockets, and made an offer. 6,000 pounds. Take it all. Gone by the fortnight. It should have been an easy yes. The farm's books that year were bleeding. Tom told him he needed a night to think it over. He didn't call back for days. That's how long Tom went without picking up the phone. Then on the 5th morning, he finally made a call. Not to the timber buyer waiting on his answer, but to his cousin Ryan, who ran a portable sawmill 2 counties over. What would it cost you to bring the rig down here for a week? The number Ryan gave him wasn't even close to what the buyer had offered for the whole pile. Tom didn't need a second night to think this time. He said yes on the spot. But before a single log could be milled, he had a problem standing in his way. 40 tons of timber sitting on ground still soft as wet cake, and no way to move it without burying his own equipment alongside it. For the next 10 days, Tom built his own solution. Skid rails made from the straightest smaller trunks, laid end-to-end across the field, so his loader could drag the bigger logs out without sinking. It was slow. It cost him a tire. It cost him more than one bad night's sleep. Half the village driving past probably thought he'd finally cracked. Then the mill arrived. Ryan stepped out of the truck, walked the row of logs Tom had staged and sorted by species, and said nothing for almost 5 full minutes. Then quietly, "You've got real timber here, Tom." The saw started the next morning, and that's when Tom made a mistake that nearly undid everything he'd fought 10 days in the mud to save. Freshly milled wood holds more water than most people realize. Dry it too fast without proper airflow, and it doesn't just warp, it splits, right down to grain, turning good timber into scrap. Tom knew the theory. He'd read it in his grandfather's manuals more than once. But when he stacked that first run of boards in the equipment shed, he stacked them flat, tight, one on top of the other. No spacers, no gap for air to move through. He assumed the shed alone would be enough. 6 weeks later, he pulled the stack apart to check on it. Nearly 4 boards and 10 were cracked clean through. Ruined. He sat down on an overturned bucket in that shed for a long time and said nothing to anyone. But he didn't walk away from it either. He res-tacked what was left properly this time. Spacers every 2 feet, a box fan running day and night, the ends of every board sealed to slow the moisture escaping. What remained dried clean over the following months, without a single further loss. And somewhere in those quiet evenings, sketching rough shapes on graph paper at the kitchen table, something started to take form. Not a shed, not another barn, a cabin, timber framed, a covered porch out front, a wood stove for the winters. Ryan came back down the weekend of the frame raise, along with 2 more hands and a rented lift. They used the same joinery Tom's grandfather had used decades earlier on the barn, still standing 40 feet from where they worked. Mortise and tenon joints, wooden pegs. Not a single metal plate in the whole structure. The oak, the straightest of it, became the floor. The sound beech became the wall framing. And the timber that had stopped Tom cold that very first morning with his pocketknife, the pale, tight grain where he almost walked straight past, became book-matched panels lining the ceiling. Ryan's idea, the best one either of them had that year. Bill Hargrove came round the day it was finished. He stood on the porch a long while, running a hand along the timber frame, without saying a word. This was those trees, he said eventually, not really a question. Most of it, Tom said. A property surveyor walked through a few weeks after that, checked the joints, stepped back outside, looked the whole thing over one more time. Places like this around here going for $85,000, $95,000, she said. With work like this, I'd put it at 90,000 pounds. Bill from a pile of worthless storm wreckage that a buyer had offered him $6,000 for, and practically told him to be grateful. Tom never sold it. He rents it out quietly now through a countryside holiday listing, and the income alone covered a full year of running the farm, plus the grazing season. He couldn't afford a year before the storm ever hit. 40 tons of broken timber. Everyone else who saw that field called it a disaster. Tom saw it differently. Not because he was lucky, because he was patient enough to look twice before he let someone else decide what it was worth. If this is the kind of story you come here for, ordinary people, impossible mornings, and the decisions that turn wreckage into something worth 90,000 pounds, hit subscribe, because there's another one just like it waiting next week. And if you've ever stood in front of your own version of that field, tell me about it in the comments. I read every single one.